Good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock exactly. I'm joined by Mr. Mishilo, who will introduce his team.
Thanks, Nobuntu. Do you think we should start or should we wait for 2 more minutes? I suggest we actually wait for 2 more minutes and then we'll start shortly.
Definitely, I think 2 more minutes.
Nobuntu, Anita, there was a message saying the meeting is locked. Can you perhaps just check whether that's true? And they're saying no other people can join, but I do see people joining, so maybe you can just check if maybe it's just a setting.
Will do. It should be open, but let me check.
All right, let's begin. Good afternoon, colleagues, and a warm welcome to everyone who has taken their time to join us on this important presentation, at least from our perspective. My name is Buitumelo Mashilo, and I'm the head of the Capital Projects Appraisals Unit in GTAC, and we are responsible for assessment of large-scale strategic and complex infrastructure proposals that need some kind of fiscal support to advance. We are also responsible for generating research or knowledge outputs that are meant to promote the best practice in appraisal and appraisal tools and methodologies. But we also get involved in the training of officials as a way of enhancing or upskilling the public sector. So today I am joined by two colleagues, one Veron Vukeya, who is a senior analyst, and Pheeha Morudu, who is a junior analyst within the Capital Projects Appraisals unit. And today we are going to talk about a reform that was introduced back in 2017. It was actually, the work that resulted in the reform started back in 2016, but we had our first call for proposals in 2017, and they'll tell you all about what the BFI is and what it isn't. But one of the things that led to the conceptualization of the BFI was the inconsistencies that we were seeing within the National Treasury in as far as assessment of large-scale infrastructure proposals were being done. It was one of the things. So over the years, we've learned some important lessons. We've contributed to a number of complementary reforms, but we've also, of late, been thinking about the efforts that the National Treasury and the whole of government has put into reforming the infrastructure ecosystem, particularly the efforts that are going into in facilitating greater private sector participation within the infrastructure space. But Pheeha and Veron will tell you all about what the BFI is and what it isn't. And Pheeha and Veron, you have about 40 minutes to go through the presentation, and I request that colleagues do not disturb them while they are doing the presentation, because after their 40 minutes presentation, we will then go into our question and answer session, which also includes general comments that people would like to make, especially those that have come across the BFI, what their experiences have been, and so on and so forth. With those words, welcome, and over to you, Pheeha and Veron.
Thank you. Welcome, colleagues, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start my first half of the presentation, and Pheeha will join later. I will just share my presentation. Thank you for your patience. Okay. So Vukeya has already given a background on the purpose of the webinar, and what we are in the BFI we're part of the technical analysis team. So we do the appraisals for large infrastructure projects that come into the Treasury for fiscal support. So within the BFI process, we are called the lead assessors, and we do exactly that. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is obviously what the BFI is, because there seems to be misconceptions on what it is. And maybe let me start by saying what it's not, which is a pot of money. So the BFI is not a pot of money. It's an appraisal process, which is meant to support the consideration of large-scale infrastructure proposals in the budget process. So that's meant to support how decisions are made there. So this is an investment decision support mechanisms that's supposed to feed into the budget process. So the end goal was to build a credible investable pipeline for the whole of public sector. So that's meant to almost generate the kind of proposals we want to see in advancing the infrastructure agenda. And through the budget office budget process, which makes available, the fiscus making available funding or other mechanisms or instruments to advance the infrastructure agenda. The BFI then complements that by making sure that the projects or programs that come through are well thought out and we have been validated to meet the technical requirements they're meant to meet. So the reform was introduced in 2016, and the problems they were trying to solve related to the fragmentation and the capital budgeting frameworks across the sectors and spheres of government, the lack of or inadequate consideration of full life cycle financial implications of proposals. So that's what we normally call full life cycle costing. And what we see there is sponsors who are the originators of projects or the people that say, hey, please support us. We want to build a road or schools. They come to seek assistance, but haven't thought through, how things will be operated and maintained later. So that becomes a problem because you find someone coming for the capital costs, but also later on, again, for operations, or maybe just repackage again 5 years, just wait a long enough time to come back for refurbs, which is also capitalized. So it's those kind of things that the reform was trying to resolve. The other thing was obviously the fact that the fiscal constraints that we see in government limiting, the government's ability to fund infrastructure. And you've seen that when there is a constraint, the first thing that gets cut, or one of the first things that get cut, is infrastructure. So we were, with the reform, trying to find a way of still advancing, the infrastructure agenda. There was also no explicit mechanism in the budget process to allow for projects or committing the budget beyond the 3-year horizon of the medium-term expenditure framework. And as you know, infrastructure takes a very long time to build. And with the way the budget process is set, there's no guarantee beyond the 3 years whether there will be money for anything really. So we were trying to also ensure that there is some kind of special treatment for infrastructure given its unique characteristics. Also, staying with the budget process issues, the poor alignment between annual appropriations and the flow of funds for infrastructure also became an issue. And what we see in the BFI, which is a good example, is sometimes well, most times, project plans change, right? And in infrastructure projects, change is inevitable. And to the extent that those changes affect the timelines and then annual cash flows, it becomes really tricky to then navigate around what it means in terms of the budget process and how the flow of funds then changes to align with the new project plan. So the budget process is sort of rigid in those in that regard. Some of the things is the fact that rollovers are not guaranteed. So if you have an infrastructure project and there was commitment or approval from the Treasury that they were going to offer support in the form of grant, and you miss a year and don't spend, there's no guarantee that the money you haven't spent will be, returned back to you or somehow channeled back to the project at a later stage when you are ready to spend. So it's those kind of issues. Obviously, I talked about the special consideration of large infrastructure projects in the budget process. So if you may know that the wage bill has like a special arrangement in the budget process, infrastructure doesn't have the same. And we were also trying to just make sure that there is consideration and it's given the necessary attention within the process. And having a streamlined channel where a pipeline that's well considered and has been evaluated to check for both high-level requirements and technical issues, which could be fed into the budget process, was very key to allow that. So the BFI, when it was established, it also established multidisciplinary and multi-layered structures, and that's to operationalize the facility and to ensure that they were the right, there was the right governance and the right people and skills and expertise to facilitate what we were trying to do. There's also dedicated procedures. So that's procedures in how we, link up to each other as part of the structures of the BFI, and also how we work with sponsors and other stakeholders within the, BFI universe. There's also a special criteria for the BFI for appraising proposals, and that is used and also translated in some of the requirements we ask for when we do have a window open. So the BFI took an incremental approach in the way that it was implemented. So there's a lot of ideas that were like penned down when it was formulated. So the thing was, it was meant to streamline, how the Treasury considered large-scale priority infrastructure projects. And where it started was with that, let's just first streamline, let's look at large infrastructure, but it also only looked at grant funding, right? So other forms of infrastructure support or fiscal support for infrastructure wasn't considered. So it's that sort of layered or incremental approach that was taken to sort of have it grow over time and take on more things as we learned from others. And the review and challenge function of the BFI, which is, the thing it really brings to the ecosystem of infrastructure, is its ability to validate the feasibility, viability, and cost effectiveness of proposals. And that is to obviously improve value for money in the way that we spend, especially for infrastructure. Very risky, a lot of loopholes here. And value for money becomes really, really important to ensure people get the services that we're trying to get out there. We're also trying to achieve allocative efficiencies in making sure that the funds that we have, the very low funds that we have, are allocated towards the things that really matter. And all of those things are well considered and checked against each other to make sure that we prioritize the things that are, one, important and two, urgent. And also with the process, we're trying to anticipate long-term fiscal commitments and just make room for those and risks and see how we can manage that. So I've already touched on this, on the fact that, the BFI operates within an ecosystem that was meant to lay a foundation for an effective public investment management system. So the BFI comes at stage 3. So this is after planning and project preparation. So it's meant to just check what the sponsors are saying in terms of what their proposal is and what they're trying to do. So the technical aspects we go into are obviously things like what you would see in the feasibility study, the needs analysis of things. Has demand been validated? Is there justification to undertake a project? We look at, is their socioeconomic justification for the fiscus to get involved. So we're talking about things like the CBA, socioeconomic impact assessments, options analysis. Is it technical? Is this the right way of delivering the project? Does it make sense? Were there other alternatives that could ideally offer better solutions or be better value for money and maybe meet the objectives more effectively? We also look at the arrangements that people come in with. So that's looking at the institutional arrangements and even financing, whether it makes sense for the kind of physical support they're looking for, or even the quantum they're asking for. So those are the kind of things we look for. So in the value chain, we're number 3. After us, the budget comes in, which is at 4. And if things are approved there, everything else then sort of happens. But obviously, you know, the BFI doesn't stop projects from happening. If you don't find support here, you might find it elsewhere. So that's basically where we are in the value chain. We contribute and we are really trying to support pipeline development. So this is very important because it explains how the BFI works, and what sponsors normally see are, you know, them just submitting and then getting an outcome. But there's a lot of things that happen within, you know, the BFI structures. So let me start by talking about the structures, then I'll talk about the process itself. So we have what we call the BFI team. The BFI team is the team that manages the day-to-day functioning of the BFI. And at the face of it is the secretariat who sits at the budget office. The secretariat team is responsible for interfacing with the sponsors, with the technical analysis process, and, you know, the structures within the BFI as a whole. They're also the ones that register projects and, you know, manage communication with sponsors and say, hey, here's the outcome of the appraisal, and we need more information if there's ever that, and also facilitate the organization of training. But beyond the secretary, there's also the team that's responsible for the appraisals themselves, which is us, the technical analysis team. But the technical analysis team is not just the team within the capital project appraisal unit. We have other experts that come in from the National Treasury, Infrastructure South Africa, DPME, and others. Others include private consultants or like private experts that augment the capacity of the technical team. So the responsibility of the technical team is appraisals, and to the extent possible, or for projects that we've done that for, is monitoring and evaluation of projects. And the BFI team reports to, or is overseen by, the Joint Technical Committee. This is made up of senior officials from the National Treasury, so that's DDG level, ISA and DPME. And their role is to make investment decisions based on the recommendations made by the technical analysis team. And they channel those decisions. So if it's a recommendation for fiscal support, that's channeled to the budget process, and that's MTech, MinConBart, Cabinet, and Parliament. So that's what happens within, you know, the BFI bubble. But what the sponsor sees is they will then prepare their projects, which is on the left panel. They will prepare projects, whether with the support of preparation facilities or not, and come into the BFI based on the call for proposals, or what we used to call the BFI guidelines that we issued once a year around May, March. And they would obviously observe the deadlines and what the requirements are, and then package the submission in such a way that will appease us and submit to the BFI. Once the BFI receives it, the Secretariat will then register the project, give it a unique number, and then obviously filter per sector, for example. And the technical analysis team will come in and they will do a pre-screening analysis. What a pre-screening is almost like the initial screening, where we look at the BFI's high-level requirements, and those are, is the project large enough? And large enough means 1 billion, equal to and greater to 1 billion. Is it in the right sector? Is it shovel ready? And is it in one of the priority areas or aligned with the priority areas? The priority areas was a way for the BFI to reflect the priorities for the countries. So things that are aligned with the National Development Plan, the Infrastructure Plan, and the SIPs would find effect in there. So once we've determined that maybe you meet the high level requirements and you have submitted enough information to enable an informed decision, on investment decision during the detailed appraisal. So if there's enough information for you to go through to detailed appraisal, then you do go through to detailed appraisal. If there isn't, then that's where the buck stops for you, and you would be hearing from the Secretariat on the outcome of that. If you have been recommended to proceed, and it's not just us who make that decision, we channel those recommendations for pre-screening to the Joint Technical Committee, who would then consider, the reports we do for pre-screening, which we don't share with sponsors, and the arguments therein to move things forward. In the Joint Technical Committee, there's a lot of outside technical, considerations, strategic conversations that happen there. So things about policy, subsidization policy, equity things come up a lot in those conversations, to sort of support the technical stuff the technical analysis team would have sort of brought into the conversation. So if the Joint Technical Committee really endorsed the recommendation made on, the pre-screening reports, whether it's to proceed to detailed analysis or not, then the detailed analysis process starts. When that starts, the technical analysis team and the Secretariat sit to allocate individual projects to individual people, which we call lead assessors. So the appraisal, like myself and Pheeha, are lead assessors for certain projects within the BFI. We are the ones that will be driving the appraisal of individual projects, but again, will be supported by the expert reference group I spoke to earlier. So that's people, like if it's a transport project, we'll have transport experts from ESA, we'll have sector experts from the National Treasury, and we'll have someone also from the DPE, or maybe an external, like a consultant who's an expert in the space as well. And that process, which is the detailed technical appraisal, will then go deep into the documents submitted. Sometimes it goes through like 500 pages. That's feasibility studies or equivalent. I mean, at this stage, we would like, when we say shovel ready, the expectation is there is a feasibility study, and there are some requirements of the BFI that maybe in a typical feasibility study may not be required, but we would like to see. So the guidelines are very specific on the kind of things we would like to see that helps. So we go into the submissions and we critique, evaluate things, we validate some of the arguments made to make sure everything makes sense from a technical point of view. And then we have preliminary reports done. We call them appraisal and recommendations report. We present those findings to the sponsor for them to give initial views, and also, make sure we understand the projects the same way they do, so that, the appraisal is balanced and, informed. And to the extent that we have follow-up questions, we ask them during this engagement. Walking away from there, they might be given a chance to submit additional documents, and we consider that as well as their responses in finalizing the report. Once the report is finalized on our side, we present it to the Joint Technical Committee, and they then make the decision whether to, recommend it to the budget process for fiscal support, whatever that could be. As I said, it's possible that you might come into the BFI asking for grant funding of $1 billion and you only get 500 million. So those things happen. Just because you're asking for something doesn't mean you'll get it, but also just because the Joint Technical Committee has recommended fiscal support doesn't mean that will be given. So there are also funding and financing decisions that take place within, the budget process, so decisions that are made by budget authorities. So that's also important. So the BFI's job ends with investment decisions. The money and how the money will flow comes from the budget process itself. And maybe just to finish, if a project does go through the budget process and it's approved for funding, that will be communicated obviously through the normal, budget process. And if we are praised, then the recommendation was for funding or fiscal support not to be provided. The options are either to refer you to project prep, because that's what we found. We found that maybe you needed more help thinking about certain things or packaging or something like that. Or the proposal sent back to the sponsor to just rethink, and you may come back later at a later stage. And basically that's the process. So how is it going? I mean, we've been in operation since 2017, like Vukeya said, and we've learned a lot of things in the process. And just going back to the objectives that were set up as part of, the BFI when it was first established, 4 objectives in particular. The first one is the standardization of the assessment of budget submissions. The second is creating a single appraisal window and a uniform operational process for managing submissions. The third was ensuring the full life cycle costs are explicitly considered in planning. And the third one was on capacitating government officials. So how are we faring in terms of each of those objectives? Well, in the first one, in terms of standardizing the assessment of budget submissions, maybe we need to take a step back and we reimagine how it looked like at the time the BFI was established. So at the time, the BFI, or before the BFI was established, we had what we call the capital planning guidelines. Those were the guidelines that were used, one, by sponsors to prepare submissions for submission to the Treasury for fiscal consideration, and two, that was used by Treasury officials for assessing proposals or those bids that came in for fiscal support. So, but there were issues with that because one, officials found that to be complex. Two, sponsors were not using it consistently in preparing bids for National Treasury consideration. And three, they were also applied inconsistently within the Treasury. So you had a unit, maybe in IGR, applying it differently to how public finance in one specific chief directorate was applying it. So there was a need to standardize the way proposals were coming in, one, and also the way they were appraised. So when the BFI came in, it introduced what we now call the BFI guidelines, or what we now call, I mean, we keep changing the name, the call for proposals, because it has some guidelines there. To simplify things. So it was meant to be a simpler way for everyone, both sponsors and the Treasury, to know what kind of requirements are there and how to navigate proposals. And once that was done, it really made the process more easy to do. But we've also had what we now have introduced as the Infrastructure Planning and Appraisal Guideline that's been published on the Treasury website. And that's a more in-depth guidance on what the expectations are. And that's aligned with the FIDPM as well. So it was meant to align better with the existing planning framework for infrastructure. But what we've also found is that now all these guidelines exist at the same time. So sponsors have the option of using all of them, but now they're uncertain on which to use, because we have the BFI guideline, we have the Infrastructure Planning and Appraisal guideline that the BFI guideline referred to was actually based on, but we still have the capital planning guidelines. But not only that, we also have the organs of state or facilities that assist sponsors come up with or put together proposals, also having their own guidelines. So there's just a lot of guidelines flying around, and sponsors are like overwhelmed and confused on which to use. So that's part of the issues that we are dealing with. So as much as we've standardized the assessment of budget submissions, there's also like things that need to be refined in that regard. But what we've also done as part of standardizing the assessment is establishing a designated independent and multidisciplinary team that was going to assess proposals. So what that means is, instead of now having a bid submission that goes to public finance because maybe it's a transport project and one from the Northern Cape going to IGR, all large infrastructure projects or proposals now come through the BFI to one team, which was the technical analysis team I spoke to earlier. So you no longer have projects going to different parts of the Treasury. We've now streamlined that process. And now we have one team working on one template and one methodology to facilitate that. And which means that, we're looking at the same thing for every project. So the analysis or the appraisal is balanced and the feedback is also the same, well, similar. And when we have that, I need to also go back to the scope. So in the way of standardizing the assessment, we also had to look at, what the scope was when the BFI was first established. And the idea then was the consideration will be for proposals requiring direct funding, and that's grants, and also sovereign guarantees, but that never happened. What happened instead was we started with just considering proposals looking for grant, but also with the establishment of the infrastructure fund, blended finance arrangements were also considered. So those may not be looking for grants. They might be looking for like borrowings and things like that. So this is the way the BFI has sort of operationalized the first objective. There are areas of improvement, although that objective was well achieved. The second one was on the appraisal, creating an appraisal window and a uniform operating process for managing submissions. So there is an annual window every year. There has been since 2017. But that window is linked to the budget process. But there's also what we have as the appraisal findings and recommendations report that I also spoke to earlier. So all the projects that come in through the BFI are assessed. Some of them don't make it to this stage because they fail at pre-screening, and we have done a report that talks to why projects do not proceed past the pre-screening stage and even I guess, get fiscal support at the detailed appraisal stage. But what I must say is that there's a complication in the way that the BFI process and timing is linked to the budget process. One is that the appraisal team is then under a lot of pressure to conclude the appraisals so that we can feed into the budget process. And remember, the timing is also such that it starts around the same time as the budget. So if we start appraisals in June, it means we have to be done by September to feed into the necessary processes so that by MTBPS everything is concluded. The other thing is that it means the sponsor then doesn't have enough time, one, to address the issues we are picking up during the appraisal, and also just engage with us more iteratively, like it was intended. So those time pressures limit to the extent that the sponsors can provide feedback or resolve issues. We end up then recommending sometimes fiscal support with conditions because there's still things outstanding to be addressed for us to feel 100% confident that an investment decision and funding decisions were warranted. So in cases where funding is not recommended because of like large or substantial gaps in the proposal, it means that sponsors have to wait like a long time to come back to the process. With an annual process, it means your first chance is this year. If you don't make it, you have to wait again for next year's window to open. So that creates, really a lot of lags in between. And sometimes, depending on when the outcome is communicated, might mean that you only have, say, 4 months to actually make it to the next window, which is not ideal, especially if we're trying to build a pipeline. So those kind of unintended consequences have also happened due to the linkage between, the budget process and the BFI. But what I also explained earlier was the fact that, the BFI, the budget process is still not, flexible enough for the kind of characteristics that we have in infrastructure. Things change a lot in infrastructure projects, but the budget process remains what it is. And, the alignment there still needs to be strengthened. In terms of the third objectives, which was ensuring that the full life cycle costs are explicitly considered in planning, that was talking to the fact that, there needs to be a way for the BFI to find comfort that if fiscal support is provided, the project or the asset that will become in the end will have the people working there, operation, enough budgets to employ people and to operate, and enough budgets to maintain. So it's looking at costs from, the building to decommissioning at the very end to ensure that we don't perpetuate the culture. Am I supposed to call it culture? The culture of under maintenance or lack of maintenance within the space or within the ecosystem. So how we've done it is that's a requirement in the guidelines. So it's explicitly stated in the guidelines that you must tell us what their life cycle costs are and what your plan is in funding these, how you're going to fund them, and how's that going to look. And what we've seen is, sponsors are doing that, but what's not coming out clearly is whether they actually do. I mean, they tell us how much it's going to be over its life, but we don't know if they really are putting away money in making the plans that they committed to ensure that there is enough funds for maintenance, for example, in the end. And this is why that objective is partially achieved. In terms of capacitating government officials, which is objective 4, the BFI during the call for proposals, or when the window is open for submission, what we call information sessions. Information sessions are meant to clarify what the requirements are and give further guidance over and above what is contained in the guidelines, what the requirements are and how to package the submissions and what the priorities are, and obviously address any questions that might come up. The information sessions normally like per sector, like there's a lot of them that happen around the window that's open, and after that then they close, right? And what we've noticed is, those happen. What we also do is we also refer projects or programs to preparation facilities if we found them to be inadequate for an investment decision at the time. And with that process, we only do that after we've gone through the detailed appraisal. So we'll pre-screen you and we say, yes, you meet the high level requirements, you're in the right sector, you meet the threshold and all of that. And then when we get deeper into your documents, even though we might have already started getting an inkling that this is probably not ready, we wait until we get to the detailed appraisal process and conclude it to then refer you. So you still are going to be subjected. And I mean, there are benefits to that. It means you are benefiting from, getting constructive feedback on the way you're thinking about the technical aspects of, of infrastructure, the way you thinking of delivering your projects and everything like that. But what we've also noticed is with the information sessions, not the right people attend. So the targeting is a bit off. So who normally comes, you'll get a municipal manager attending information sessions. And those were meant to be sessions for the people that deal with the technical aspects of projects. So the people that will do the options analysis, for example, will be hands-on in terms of developing the feasibility study and the technical parts of everything. So when it's those people that attend, it also means that, you're not really explaining things to the people that will find them useful or will actually action them. So that's not working. What we're also realizing is the fact that perhaps information sessions on their own and referring sponsors is not enough. Maybe there's more that needs to be done, and maybe this information sessions should probably be open longer than when the window's open, just so as people prep to submit next year, for example, they can now just ask the questions as they go through the preparation. So that's how we fared in terms of meeting the objectives. So mostly achieved, but there are areas of improvement as I've highlighted. But I'm now going to hand over to Pheeha to take us through, how it's going further. Pheeha?
Thank you, Veron. Good afternoon, colleagues. So I'm just gonna take you through the practicality, because I realize that Veron has said quite a lot, so that we also have time for discussions. As we have mentioned, colleagues, that since we have started with the BFI, there has been, since 2017 to date, there's been about 8 windows in total, and we have evaluated about over 300 submissions. And those we were targeting, throughout the years, we were targeting shovel-ready projects which are large and in social economic sectors, key ones. And also we wanted interventions that were strategic in nature, such that they promote economic growth, social equity, as well as create jobs. And I can say in summary that there were 2 observations when during the appraisal processes. Firstly, if you remember, colleagues, that the end goal of the facility is to create, to build a credible, investable pipeline of large infrastructure project within the whole public sector. However, we have seen that the pipeline generation remains quite slow. And also, we also have observed that the BFI appraisal methodology has not extended to the broader infrastructure planning system. So basically, it hasn't actually changed behavior in which projects are prepared in the upstream. And then we also seen that there are some quite issues. There are quite a lot of issues in the planning for infrastructure as a whole. So this leads us to the broader issues, colleagues. Broader issues. The first one. The broader issues, they are quite, we have observed that we have learned through the 8 windows that there were quite inadequacies in the planning and preparation framework of government. This was seen through the fact that many proposals do not proceed beyond the pre-screening process, as well as those that proceed to detailed technical analysis unless are recommended for fiscal support. And colleagues, we have there are a lot of reasons that they can explain the technical issues that we find with those submissions that went through the processes, and that involves like the packaging stuff, as well as the amount, like the poor quality of submissions in general. And that can that was explained in the common reasons report that Veron has mentioned. And also we have realized that they are even the ones that that are recommended for funding support through the BFI and eventually are allocated budgets do take quite a considerable amount of time to reach implementation. And we also know that the process, the procurement process is quite rigid and lengthy, and there are definitely inadequacies in the authorizing environment there, colleagues. And then moving on like to the broader issues, is that given the fiscal consolidation that has been happening, we have seen quite an increase in the number of submissions, and also that can definitely be due to the misconception that the BFI is the pot of funds, but there is definitely has been an increase due to the fiscal consolidation. And also there has been over the years, primarily BFI has been quite based on the grant funding, and then even projects that required 100% funding requests would come through the BFI. But then we have seen the evolution in which now the projects that require, like we are moving on to the gap funding. So we also, we are moving on to get funding with more financing instruments that involve also guarantees as well as borrowing. And we have also observed, colleagues, the fact that there has been an entrenched bias towards the on-budget fiscal allocation instead of project sponsors exploring alternative financing solutions. So many project sponsors lean towards the on-budget fiscal allocation. And then there's just been misalignment with the fact that they're supposed to be applying the public finance principles, but yet they choose just to is unjustified on why they do come to the BFI. And then this leads us to the fact that there is definitely, we have seen that there is definitely some level of forum shopping, that maybe it's because of the requirements that the BFI have in place. So project sponsors, we have seen that there are proposals that are better suited for advancement through dedicated structures, but somehow those project sponsors have a tendency to approach the BFI instead of those dedicated structures. And Veron has spoken quite a lot about the fact that the budget process is still does not account for the unique characteristics of the infrastructure. So I will not delve into that. And the last one, colleagues, is the fact that there are pricing policy inadequacies and uncertainties especially in instances whereby there's no policy in place, which introduce potential contradictions. So we have seen that the pricing strategies, especially in cases like the pricing strategies do not reflect that they are not cost reflective, and hence the project sponsors come to the BFI so that the BFI can close that gap. So we have seen problems with that, and that can create quite complications in the process. So, but then, despite the lesson learned, colleagues, they are definitely the fact that BFI is still relevant is not questionable, and it has largely been a success. And we have seen its contributions in promoting the best appraisal, the best practice in appraisals, and it has through this lesson learned, it has quite informed complementary reforms. And despite this, colleagues, there is definitely a need to redefine and strengthen strategic trust within an evolving institutional ecosystem. So we have heard that, especially like with what's next, we have heard the minister did announce the fact that the minister during the MTVVS did announce the fact that BFI is being configured, and remember, our main aim is to build generate credible pipeline, and through this reconfiguration, we hope to support and achieve greater impacts in the ecosystem, and also build a stronger strategic focus, and improve as well its governance and operations. And these new arrangements, colleagues, on what we can expect is basically the fact that BFI will become a centralized gateway for all infrastructure projects. And the key features that is that, firstly, I'm just going to highlight a few. Firstly, it's that the reconfigured facility will appraise large infrastructure proposals that require any form of fiscal support to advance. So it may be constitutional borrowing, guarantees, all forms of fiscal support. They will be coming through this facility. And also the second feature is that this time around it will be an open-ended process. So it means that, like, throughout the past years, we have seen that we had deadlines, we had only one window, but then this time around, we'll see there will not be any submission deadlines. So we'll see that the evaluations and investment decisions will occur throughout the year. And colleagues, that means that there will be several sittings in a year to consider proposals that have advanced to that have advanced post pre-screening stage. So it means that we'll definitely, this is to make sure that there is a continuous generation of portfolio investment worthy proposals that will be channeled in the budget process, and then this will happen when they are ready. So there's no need for sponsors now to rush through the submissions, because there is a deadline, but then there will be a way for them to engage in those different sittings throughout the year. And then the third one, colleagues, the third key feature is that there will be a referral of proposals that require preparation support during the pre-screening stage. So upfront referral of those proposals. And then this affects, colleagues, as I said, they will take place in 2025, as the minister has announced that. And some people may think that this is quite new, but the 2024 special window actually did involve some of these changes. So we did include, piloted some of this proposal, like some of this changes, and it facilitated those. So for instance, the threshold of program eligibility was lowered to 1 billion. And then, if you remember, colleagues, the scope has been broadened through like now we were explicit, in the previous window, we were explicit on the that we were targeting private sector participations, including the triple piece. And then there was also a referral of project proposal that required a preparation facility upfront. So those were not, like, it may seem that it's quite new, but actually we have piloted it before, colleagues. And colleagues may remember that Veron has mentioned the ecosystem itself, that we are only on stage 3 of the ecosystem. And we need to remember that even though the facility is only one part of the infrastructure value chain, there's definitely a need for complementary reforms and improvements in other parts of the value chain. For instance, my colleague did mention the fact that in the upstream, there are a lot of issues upstream. So we definitely need to see some quite of improvements there. And also in the, if we look at the project evaluation side, there's also some, there needs to be some improvements there. And colleagues, we have seen also that like through the MTBBS, there are definitely some reforms that chapter 5 of the MTBBS, there are definitely some reforms which are being introduced in the infrastructure space. And these are actually the useful resources. I know I flew through the presentation, but then they are definitely useful in terms of the first one. It does is where you'll find the technical issues regarding the project or proposals that we do receive, what has been observed. And also the second one is the planning appraisal guideline that is out there, and to guide the sponsors in their preparation. And then the last one is the infrastructure chapter that I referred to, whereby I did mention that the minister outlined some reforms, useful reforms to increase private sector participation, and which includes the implementation of the triple P recommendations, and also as well as the reforming of the government borrowing for infrastructure in order for us to have a sustainable infrastructure financing. Yeah, colleagues, that's it from my side. Veron, you want to add before we hand over?
Yeah, sure. I just want to add that as much as we've reflected on, almost from a sponsor's perspective, there are also improvements that are underway for the operational side of the BFI as well, to sort of complement, the sponsor experience and complement our intent to support the generation of a pipeline. So these changes or the reconfiguration will look both within, the structures and the BFI itself and the way it operates, and also, the experience of sponsors and how we can try get projects through and, quickly identify the projects that are worthy of investment and fiscal support, and have the budget process also, support that in the way that it treats or handles, infrastructure projects. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Veron and Pheeha, on that thorough presentation. I know that you've gone beyond the 40 minutes that you were allocated. You are forgiven. Let's do a quick round of questions from the floor, just to make sure that people do have an opportunity to also make their contributions. Anyone who would like to ask a question or comment based on their experience working with the BFI? So a lot of Navy, you have the floor. Please introduce yourself and the institution that you represent, and you may ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nevis Mukonda. I executive responsible for integrated programs management for the Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency. I think in terms of the lessons learned, I think I'm happy with the presentation that the two colleagues have done, and I think we appreciate that insight. It gives a lot of information for all those who are aspiring to consider putting applications of this nature. But I think what I just want to raise, Chair, is the issue, the work of the Joint Technical Committee. I know that I am giving this input based on 2 applications that we did. One was for the marine tilapia incubator initiative, which was supposed to be implemented in the Mbasha local municipality. And then one was for the Makwa Majola agri corridor that we wanted also to put. I think initially they received very good appetite in terms of consideration. And then we moved on to the second stage where we got, I think, issues and concerns raised by the GTC. We did respond specifically to each and every item that was raised by GTC in terms of the marine tilapia. I think the first one, the one for Makwa, we understood the issues of not them wanting to consider to evaluate it. But the second one, I think there was indication that there was some appetite. But in terms of the issues that they raised that we should clarify as ECRITA for the province, we strived, Chair, to clarify them. But I think to our disappointment is that we did not get a comprehensive response from the GTC based on the clarity that we made, that the clarification that we sent did not match or respond adequately to their concerns, that they can't go further. As I speak to now, all we got was the letter that no. I think the letter was also sent from somewhere else where it says no, they wouldn't continue to finance this or consider for evaluation because of, I think they put one reason mainly it was issues of scale and the issue of involvement of potential private partners. But when you look at, Chair, the questions that they raised, it was quite a lengthy, which we made a very detailed submission, which was about more than 15 pages. But we were going to be happy if we had received a feedback based on what we submitted so that we can work and improve on all those issues that they raised. As I speak to you now, Chair, we got partners, IDC and Infrastructure South Africa, coming on board to assist us to revive that business case to do that. But it would have been useful if those concerns that the GTC had raised, we got final feedback. It would help us now as we put a new proposal together to do that. As we go, we intend to submit it before the next closing window. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Navy. I think that's quite a specific comment that you are making. And what I want to say in relation to that is just to respond directly to it, and then we go further. It's that generally, no, not general, without exception, when we send the final response letter, it comes from the Secretariat. It will have our report. So the appraisal report, it will have the recommendation that we would have set to the Joint Technical Committee and what the Joint Technical Committee had said based on the recommendation that we had made. So I am surprised that on both these proposals, you are saying that you did not get those reports. And maybe what we can do, we can take it offline. If you can just send us your email address, I'll forward it to the Secretariat, and then we just deal with it in that way. Our process is quite transparent in that sense. During the technical review panel meetings, we give you our report and we say, this is what we are seeing, these are the gaps that we are seeing, and so on and so forth. Tell us, are we misunderstanding, and so on and so forth. And then even after we make our final recommendation, it goes through to the JTC and so on and so forth. The report itself that we have generated does go back to the sponsor. So I just think that something may have happened in the case of those two. And I remember both proposals. So I'm just surprised that you didn't get that. But anyway, that was just a specific comment. Let me take the 3 questions I see. Sipo Mahlangu, let's start with you, followed by Jamie, and then we'll end with Ngumshe, at least in this round. Sipho?
Good day, colleagues. So I'm from the Department of Water and Sanitation. I'm responsible for the project preparation of our RBIG and BFI projects. Firstly, I just wanted to give feedback that as a department, we've sort of aligned our planning processes, or our existing planning processes were mostly aligned to your planning processes, but we've enhanced them to bring in those financial aspects like the CBAs, etc., to align fully to the BFI requirements. And now we're trying to cascade that through the sector through a SOP that's then going to make it sort of a code of practice in terms of how we package our projects as a sector. So I just wanted to give you that feedback in that regard. And then I also just wanted to say thanks for the presentation. It was great. And we're excited with the reforms that you guys are making in terms of reducing the threshold for the programs and then also opening up the window to a continuous window. So we appreciate those reforms. It will make our jobs a lot easier. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Sipho. Let's take Jamie. I'm not used to the BFI being complimented, but I'll come back to that. So, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Jamie. I'm working with GTAC on the long-term financial planning. My question is, you were talking about the full life cycle costing, etc. But all the proposals and the appraisals, I haven't seen the latest guidelines. They're very project focused. Now, wouldn't it make sense on municipalities to also include the capital expenditure framework and the long-term financial plans, which should take recognition of what the long-term financial impact is going to be of these projects? And I'm just querying, do you actually build that into the appraisal? Because the LTFP also has a lot to do with the sustainability of the municipality itself. So it's just a question in terms of, it seems to be very, very project focused. Would it not be a bit more feasible to do an organizational wide and bring in the CEF and the LTFP? Thank you. But thanks for the presentation.
Thanks, Jamie. Let's take Ngumshe. Umla.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you as well for the presentation. I'm from the Department of Water and Sanitation and Water Services Planning Support. Yes, just a couple of, well, I think for starters, just to commend the presenters and just indicate, yeah, the excitement around the open-ended approach, because it was really frustrating us having to work within the, the timeframes, especially considering that, you're looking at shovel-ready projects and, some of the legislative requirements obviously would take longer to finalize. So, yeah, that is a positive way forward, I must say. Just a few questions though. Where to start? The assumption then is that sorry, I haven't gone through the latest framework as well. The assumption is that all the funding that is approved is channeled through the various departments, that are, well, depending obviously on the type of project. If it's a human settlement project, the funding will be channeled through Human Settlements Department. If it's a roads project, it will be, something like those. And I know with water projects, obviously, they are channeled through the Department of Water and Sanitation. Is that the case? I'm assuming that it is the case with all the other funding as well. I'm excited as well in terms of having recognized that there's a disjuncture in terms of all the planning guidelines. Because, a municipality will have its own guidelines. We will have our own guidelines. And, they would have gone through the entire process. And because the funding is channeled through, for an example, the department, we've got our own guidelines as well. And there's always been that challenge that we have had because, the municipality would have assumed that it's finished with everything that they needed to. But because the funding needs to be channeled through us, then there's more requirements, which municipalities were obviously not happy with. I'm happy that at least we're looking into the alignment in terms of the planning guidelines. But what I wanted to check as well is when these institutions apply for funding, I'll refer mostly to municipalities. Do we then do a verification check just to see if they have not applied for other streams of funding for for the very same projects, and how do you go about doing that? And then in terms of the pre-screening stage, I just needed to check as well, where do most projects actually fail? For an example, with us, with the operations and maintenance plans, where obviously they need to indicate their operational and maintenance capacity, in terms of finance and human resources and all of that. Bulk of these municipalities obviously fail, because when you look into their revenue streams versus what the operations and maintenance cost will be over the life cycle cost of the projects that they're applying for, the proposed infrastructure, there always is no guarantee or positive report in terms of, that they will have the capacity actually to maintain or operate this infrastructure. Yet we still, approve the funding. So I'm not too sure, in terms of the screening process, whether bulk of these projects that never go through, is it because of that or there are other elements? And then you mentioned the issue of conditional, approval as well. I wanted to find out, what is an example of a project where you had approved conditionally, and what is the success rate then of them as well meeting, the requirements afterwards? Based on the conditions, obviously, that would have been stipulated. I think let me just pack it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Pumla. Colleagues, there we have two sets of questions from Jamie and Pumla, and a comment from Sipo. Do you want to, Veron? Do you maybe want to take some of these, and I can also come in? Well, you can indicate if you want me to come in on any of them.
Please take Jamie's one. I can come in on double dipping, but you can also come in. But let me answer the double dipping question first. So the way the structure works is that we work with the reference group. So if you have received funding or applied for funding through other forms that Treasury has sight of, then we'll know, because we work with the Treasury officials that work on the same sectors and things like that. So that's how we circumvent some of that. But the other thing is, we always say this word, well, this line of phrase, is that the BFI is supposed to be the place you come only when you've explored all of avenues and you have exhausted them and can prove that you have, and there's nowhere else for you to go, so that we can help you, get to the last, run through the last mile. And normally what sponsors do when they have done that is they provide proof that they've gone through, this, they've asked for this loan, or they've gone here and they said no, and this, and all of that. And that's mainly how we check. We don't, contact other funding mechanisms or to find out whether the same project has funding, but to the extent that our stakeholders are part of the process, we do get some of that information from there. But also we operate on trust with the public sector sponsors to be able to be truthful on whether they've received money on some of these things or not. Can I move on to conditions? On the issue of conditions, so some of the things, there was a comment about the CBA earlier. Maybe there's a proposal that came in, and maybe the proposal hasn't quite, maybe done a credible CBA, and we say, oh no, go redo it. This is not how you do it. And we think, all the things are there, like besides the CBA, which we can already see if you resolve this and this, the outcome will be fine and fiscal support will be justified. Then we say, if it's a grant, we say, a grant is recommended, conditional on you resolving these issues by this date, right? And so you get that kind of condition to say, resolve the CBA, send it back to us to review and just confirm that it's the right one and we accept it. And an example of this would be the Limpopo Central Hospital. The Limpopo Central Hospital had conditions imposed, and that's also because it came in through at the time in 2018, it was still had to go through some planning. So there was a lot of conditions around that project that we have been monitoring since. So there's that monitoring element that comes in when there's a lot of conditions, and for us to be satisfied that you've met all of them. And yes, they do meet the conditions, but there are challenges with imposing conditions. This is why we would like an open-ended process. That way you get an outcome, you can come into the next, you can come, you submit again in 3 months once you've resolved, because there are legalities around, whether you can impose conditions on the flow of funds. So those are some of the issues we're trying to also just avoid. And yeah, that's what I want to deal with for now, at least. Yeah. Thanks, Putima.
All right. Thanks. Well, maybe let me start on a positive note. And the positive note is that I'm not used to the BFI being complimented. It's generally that, oh no, the process is too cumbersome, the kinds of information that you are asking for, we don't have it, and so on and so forth. So Sipho, it's really good to hear that you are aligning your planning processes in line with the BFI. One of the points that Pheeha made, I think it was Pheeha, was that we are concerned that despite some level of success from the BFI, the appraisal methodology that it applies has not necessarily filtered into the broader planning framework of government. But it's good to see that at least from a water and sanitation perspective, you are already looking into that. Jamie, your question is a valid one, and maybe let me start here just so that there is clarity. The BFI is about it's an appraisal process, that's for sure. But when we are talking about unlocking fiscal support, and let's just say what you are looking for is a direct funding allocation. It's direct funding allocation for CAPEX and not necessarily for O&M. That's important. And what Jamie was asking is in relation to the O&M and the institutional issues. And it's important that while the BFI guidelines, or what is now called the infrastructure planning and the evaluation guideline, is focused on projects, we know that projects don't happen in a vacuum. So towards the latter section, part of the of the guideline, it talks about the institutional and operational readiness section. And in there, it asks questions around the capacity and the capability of the sponsor to be able to do everything that the sponsor says they will do, including on issues related to the O&M component. And in that respect, we then look into the institution, say, well, open your books and let's see how you've sort of been doing. Let's look at your financial plans and so on and so forth. Because one of the things that we get asked, especially we see this a lot in municipalities, you get given a submission, and there was a submission this year. Maybe let me use that. There was a submission this year from a very small municipality. Their total capex grant annually is about R1 billion, and they came into the BFI looking for, I think it was R6 billion, and we said, let's just assume that you meet all the requirements. Let's just assume for a moment that you meet all the requirements. Tell us about how you're going to deal with issues related to operations and maintenance, because their tax revenue is very, very, very limited. But also they have a high indigency rate. So the question was, how are you going to operate and maintain your infrastructure? And we were told, no, let's not worry about that. Let's just put the infrastructure in place, and then we can worry about long-term, maintenance over time, and our financial, long-term financial sustainability. And we said, no, we cannot, through the BFI, support you into going to bankruptcy, because that's effectively what we would be doing. You build this massive infrastructure and there is no plan on how they are going to maintain it. And if we, push them hard and say, well, you wanted this money, go and, make a plan around how it's going to be maintained, we will simply bankrupt the municipality. So, Jamie, what I'm trying to say in in short, is that while the guidelines are project specific, we do look at the institutions, and the structure within which the project is taking place. I'm looking at the time, so I need to move quickly. And then Pumla, I mean, on the you raised quite a number of points, and I just want to start with this one. A lot of projects actually fail at the pre-screening stage, and not necessarily because they don't meet the requirement, but simply because they don't submit sufficient information. So if you don't have a feasibility study or something equivalent to a feasibility study, that's where the end of the process is with you. And that's the major reason why a lot of projects don't go forward. Veron has dealt with the issue of potential for double dipping, but I also want to deal with this point of forum shopping. There's two aspects to forum shopping. A lot of what we sort of see in the ecosystem is that people apply for funding everywhere, and they're hoping that somewhere they will get the support that they require. That's what we mean. Well, that's part of what we mean by forum shopping. The other part of what we mean by forum shopping is that while the BFI requirements are higher than what they would typically have to meet if they didn't, if they had to go, for example, via the conditional grants, the requirements are not the same if you were to go for a commercial loan of some sort. So people seems to be going on the path that has the least resistance, and sometimes that path is the BFI, but other times that path is not the BFI. And so those are the two aspects of what we mean by forum shopping. And maybe let me just stop here for now, again, in the interest of time. I know that we're already a minute over. Please just give me 2 minutes to really thank the colleagues for joining this session, and to really thank Pheeha and Veron for giving us the kind of presentation that they have given us. You are more than welcome to get in touch with us if you perhaps would like us to come and present to your specific institution, or whatever you've got specific issues that you want to raise with us. But really, thank you for your attention and for your time. And I know that usually we have the link. There's a link on the chat that says kindly take a minute to rate your experience via this link. Please take a moment to do that for us. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your attention. The webinar is over and closed. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.